The check cleared on a Thursday morning in early March, and I watched $200,000 vanish from my account with a strange mix of anxiety and pride. My brother, Jack, called me the moment the confirmation email hit, his voice full of energy and conviction. "Lena, we're finally doing it," he said, like this was our shared dream, and not just his restaurant fantasy dressed in brother-sister loyalty. I smiled tightly as I looked around my living room, the same place I had spent months rebuilding after my divorce. This money wasn't just an investment, it was the foundation of my new life, and I had just handed it to someone I loved more than reason. Before I continue narrating the story of Lena Fields, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Jack had been working on this restaurant idea for nearly a year, sketching floor plans on napkins and rattling off ideas about fusion menus and community outreach. He wasn't just a cook, he was an artist in the kitchen, passionate and visionary, but historically terrible with money. His food truck venture 3 years ago had ended in bankruptcy and unpaid vendor bills, but he insisted this would be different. "You'll be more than an investor," he told me over brunch one weekend. "You'll be my partner, Lena, 50-50, like we always said when we were kids playing make-believe restaurant in Mom's kitchen." He had a full business plan this time, spreadsheets with projected margins and market research about the trendy downtown strip he wanted to build on. I read it all twice before saying yes, impressed by the detail, if not entirely convinced by the optimism. But the enthusiasm in Jack's eyes made it hard to say no, especially when he added, "Banks won't touch me, but you know me. You know I won't screw this up." I remembered the time I lent him $2,000 after the truck collapsed, and how he cried when he couldn't pay it back. I wanted to believe this time was different, that he'd grown, that this was finally his moment. We spent the next few weeks in near constant contact. Emails about equipment, texts with photos of potential tile designs, calls debating point-of-sale systems. Jack handled kitchen layout and culinary choices. I took over business licensing, vendor contracts, and staffing logistics. We were partners in every sense except on paper, and every time I asked about formalizing our agreement, Jack said, "Soon, I promise." It wasn't trust that made me wait. It was loyalty, that dangerous thread that sometimes pulls tighter the closer family gets to success. By the time opening night arrived, I had sunk more hours into the restaurant than into any of my previous consulting clients. The launch was a full house success, with plates flying out of the kitchen and Jack grinning like a rock star under heat lamps. I stayed mostly in the back, double-checking inventory and ensuring our staff stayed on top of the rush. My chest swelled with pride when a local blogger called the duck confit transcendent and named the restaurant a must-watch newcomer. Jack hugged me tight after the last table left and said, "We're going to change everything, sis. Just you wait." I believed him, or at least I believed in us, and in that quiet moment between clinking glasses and trash-bagging leftovers, I felt like I had finally found my second act. But 7 days later, he called me into the office with a coldness I hadn't heard since we were teenagers, arguing over who Mom loved more. "Lena, I think it's best if we keep things clean and simple moving forward," he began, eyes on the framed food critic review hanging behind me. He handed me an envelope, inside a check for $212,000 and a typed statement of release. "You're out," he said flatly. "You were an investor, and this closes the loop. I need to run this without distractions." I stared at him in silence, my breath catching on the word distractions. "I'm sorry. What the hell are you talking about?" I said, pushing the check back toward him like it was toxic. Jack didn't look up. "You're a consultant, Lena. You helped get this off the ground. That doesn't make you a co-owner." My blood went cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate erasure. I felt something inside me shift, like a lock clicking open on a door I hadn't known was closed. I pulled out my phone and tapped on the voice memo labeled, "Jack, agreement, January." His voice crackled through the tiny speaker. 50-50, Lena. You put up the cash, I bring the vision. This is our baby." Jack's face didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened on the desk. "That's not a signed contract," he said quietly. "You know how courts treat oral promises." I laughed. A sharp, bitter thing that startled even me. "You actually planned this," I said. "You played me for a bank." Jack finally met my eyes. "I just need it to be mine. You'll be fine. You've got your consulting. This is all I have." I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every email, every late-night brainstorm, every compromise I had made to lift his dream off the ground. "Keep the check," I said, backing toward the door. "I don't need your hush money." He called my name, but I didn't stop. I walked through the restaurant like it was a museum of someone else's life. Our hand-picked tiles, our Edison bulbs, our reclaimed wood bar, now wiped clean of me. The staff watched me pass without a word. I think some of them knew. Others just looked confused, but no one said anything. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Jack and I had once covered in blueprints and menu mock-ups, and stared at the void he'd left behind. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder labeled Restaurant Build Lena. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, design contracts, bank transfers, all the proof of what I had done, all the receipts he hoped I'd ignore. If he wanted clean and simple, I'd give him something pristine. By sunrise, I had assembled a digital war chest, PDFs of vendor agreements signed in my name, receipts with my credit card billed, and screenshots of text conversations where Jack referred to me as his partner. I opened a fresh document and began outlining everything I had contributed, monetary, managerial, and emotional. My hands shook a little as I typed, but the motion steadied with each line I added, like building armor out of truth. I wasn't drafting a lawsuit, not yet, but I wanted to know I could. Jack had taken my money, my work, and my trust, and in return offered me a severance envelope and a lie. I reached out to Rachel first, our sous chef, who I'd hired after interviewing 15 candidates, while Jack wavered over wanting a vibe match. "Hey, Ratch, I texted casually, can you send me that menu draft we worked on in February? I need it for my portfolio." She replied in seconds with the attachment and a heart emoji, oblivious to the war lines being drawn. Then I emailed Charlie, the designer who built our brand identity and who built everything through me. "I'm updating my business records." I wrote, "Can you confirm that the invoices for the signage, logo, and website were addressed to Lena Fields Consulting, LLC? His response was short but helpful. "Absolutely. All payments were made by you. Want me to resend them?" By mid-afternoon, I had compiled a 64-page PDF labeled Ownership Contributions L. Fields. It detailed every contract signed, every check cut, every expense filed under my name. My friend Camilla, a corporate lawyer I'd met through a mutual client, reviewed it over Zoom. "He can't just erase this, Lena," she said, adjusting her glasses. "This is overwhelming evidence that you acted in a co-owner capacity, even without a formal agreement. It might not win you the whole restaurant, but it's enough to open serious negotiations, and definitely enough to cause him pain." I didn't want the restaurant. Not anymore. The space had soured for me, like milk gone bad in a beautiful glass bottle. But I wanted the truth acknowledged, and I wanted him to feel even a fraction of what I had felt standing in that office as he stripped me of everything I had given him. "I'm not suing," I told Camilla, "but I'm not going away either. I'll bleed this out slow until the truth becomes impossible to avoid." That weekend, I posted a simple photo on my personal LinkedIn page, a snapshot of the restaurant's opening night, Jack and me standing side by side, arms around each other, beaming. The caption read, "One of my proudest projects, $200,000 in personal investment, months of planning, hiring, design, and launch management. Watching it grow is bittersweet, but I'm proud of my work. I didn't name the restaurant. I didn't tag Jack." But I knew how quickly people connect dots, especially in our tightly networked local business scene. The post racked up likes and comments faster than anything I'd shared before. Old colleagues congratulated me, friends from business school asked for tips on startup investing, and one of the early restaurant suppliers commented, "Wouldn't have happened without you." I let the post breathe, replying graciously, "Never bitter, but never hiding either." Jack saw it the next day. He had to. That evening, I got a curt text from him. "We should talk." We met at a quiet park near our childhood home. The one with the rusty jungle gym and the ice cream cart that still somehow operated every spring. Jack looked tired, like he hadn't slept much, but I didn't ask. He sat on the bench first, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't give him that satisfaction. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Your betrayal, or the public record of my contributions you've conveniently ignored." "I didn't think it would blow up like this," he muttered, staring at the mulch under his shoes. "I just needed to simplify things. Investors complicate ownership, especially when they want control." I stared at him, incredulous. "You begged for my help, Jack. You said partner. You said 50-50. You said it over breakfast with tears in your eyes." He ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he used to make before school presentations. "I know what I said. But once things got rolling, I realized I couldn't share this with anyone. It's my name on the sign, my recipes, my face in the interviews. It got too messy in my head." I didn't let him finish. "So you erased me." "I tried to make it right with the check," he said, pulling a new envelope from his jacket. "This one has $225K. I added more. "Please, Lena, let's just end this quietly." I didn't touch it. "It's not about the money anymore. You stole something from me that can't be refunded." We sat in silence for a while, both watching a toddler struggle up the slide while his dad filmed from the grass. Jack sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that wanted sympathy. "You always get the credit, Lena. You've always been the golden one. I just wanted something that was mine." That confession, raw and petty, landed like a slap across my face. "So you destroyed what we had to protect your ego?" "I didn't mean to destroy anything," he whispered, as if that excused it. "I just didn't know how to include you without feeling like a sidekick in my own story." That was when I realized Jack hadn't outgrown the shadows he thought I cast. He had just decided to burn the light source. "You didn't protect your story, Jack," I said, standing. "You just made sure everyone else would one day know it's a lie." I walked away from the park without taking the envelope, without promising silence, without offering forgiveness. Jack didn't follow me. That was his choice. Mine was just beginning. And I wasn't done yet. By Monday morning, I had already declined 3 requests for interviews. One from a local food blog, another from a regional business podcast, and the last from a reporter who'd covered the restaurant's opening. Each asked in different ways whether I wanted to share my side or correct the record, but I wasn't ready to go fully public. Not yet. Letting curiosity simmer was more effective than dousing it with sound bites. I forwarded each request to a folder I named Leverage and returned to organizing my documentation. My next step was subtle but deliberate. A coffee meetup with Melody Tran, the city's most connected events coordinator, who booked everything from restaurant launches to charity galas. We met at a cafe I'd helped redesign 3 years earlier, and I made sure to arrive first. When she sat down, smiling and brushing away a strand of hair, I greeted her warmly. "Mel, have you been to Ember since it opened?" I asked, referring to Jack's restaurant by its name for the first time since our falling out. Her eyes lit up, then narrowed, the way they do when she senses a story behind a question. "I went opening week," she said. "Food was incredible, but I heard some weird things about how it got started." "Didn't she used to consult for them?" I sipped my cappuccino slowly before replying. "I was a bit more than a consultant, honestly. I put up $200,000 and co-led everything until, well, things shifted." Melody raised an eyebrow, her instincts clearly activated. "That explains a lot," she said. "He's been pushing really hard for some solo press. Wants to host a charity dinner next month under his name alone, no mention of partners or investors." I leaned in slightly, keeping my tone casual. "If anyone asks, just let them know I'm still very much involved behind the scenes. It's important people don't forget how this place got on its feet." I didn't ask her to do anything more, and I didn't have to. Melody, like most power connectors, hated being misled. Word would spread in the right circles without my fingerprints. I wanted industry people whispering, not accusing, just enough to make Jack uncomfortable, but not yet defensive. The kind of pressure that feels like fog, inescapable, directionless, and always damp. Later that week, I updated my business website with a new section called Selected Projects. Ember was listed right at the top with high-quality photos, performance metrics from its first 3 months, and a breakdown of my role in its launch. I stuck to facts: co-developed business model, directed hiring strategy, spearheaded branding and operations setup. No adjectives, no spin, just the truth. But the truth, presented well, has a bite. Almost immediately, inquiries came in. Potential clients impressed by my work on a trending restaurant, asking if I could help replicate that success. I accepted a few contracts and turned down others, careful to maintain bandwidth for my broader plan. Jack had taken something that belonged to me, and I wasn't going to win it back through chaos or lawsuits. I was going to replace it. Brick by brick, project by project, I would make his betrayal irrelevant by outgrowing it. Still, I wasn't immune to the emotional undercurrent of what I was doing. Late at night, I'd stare at the Edison bulb fixture above my kitchen table, the same design we installed at Ember, and feel my throat tighten. Jack had once said those bulbs made the space feel like a promise. Now they just reminded me how easy it had been for him to turn that promise into an exit plan. I wondered if he had ever really seen me as his equal, or if I had always been a tool with a shared last name. Aunt Elise called me out of the blue the following weekend, her voice as sharp and alert as ever. "You've been quiet," she said, "and Jack's been louder than ever." I leaned against my bedroom doorframe and stared at my reflection in the closet mirror. "I'm working," I said honestly. "Building something of my own again." "Elena," she said, always my full name when she was serious. "Whatever happened between you two, people are starting to notice. I heard Patricia saying you bailed on the restaurant after investing, and Jack's just been letting that version ride." I felt my stomach twist. "That's not what happened," I replied, carefully controlling my tone. "He didn't correct her?" Elise scoffed. "Sweetheart, he's been correcting nothing. I didn't ask her to pick sides." Elise had always been fair, and I knew she'd make her own judgment. But the idea of Jack letting family believe I had walked away willingly, that I was flighty or selfish, fueled something cold and sharp in my chest. I thanked her for calling, then sat down to write a long overdue email. Not to Jack, but to our parents. The message was honest and measured. I explained the investment, the verbal agreements, and the sudden cutoff. I didn't badmouth Jack, but I laid out the facts with links, screenshots, and even a short audio clip of his 50-50 promise. I ended it with a simple line: "I'm not asking you to get involved. I just want you to know the truth, in my words, before you hear a version that erases me completely." Their reply came the next day. Short, polite, but cool. "Thank you for the update," my father wrote. "We love you both. We hope you can resolve this privately." I stared at the words, then closed the laptop. Neutrality always felt like betrayal, wearing a polite tie. Meanwhile, Ember began to falter, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. A once-weekly wine pairing post was now monthly. The Instagram engagement had dropped off. A mutual friend mentioned the second-line cook had quit after a pay dispute. Then, another server left, and a supplier I'd introduced Jack to quietly cut ties. I didn't gloat. But I noticed. Each fracture in his operation made the same thought echo louder in my mind. You needed me more than you'll ever admit. And now, as the cracks widened, I wasn't going to fix them. I wasn't going to save the restaurant. I was going to let the myth of Jack's solo genius crumble under the weight of its own lie. A month passed before I heard Jack's name again, and when I did, it wasn't from family. It was from Darren, a mutual friend who ran a boutique bakery 2 doors down from Ember. "Something's off with your brother," Darren said over coffee. "He came in here asking if I'd float his flour supplier a personal reference. Sounded stressed, like things are slipping." I stirred my drink slowly, not feigning surprise. "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said, and Darren nodded, though he looked unconvinced. That same afternoon, I walked through downtown just to see for myself. Ember's usual midday buzz was replaced with a strange quiet. Only 2 occupied tables and a server leaning on the hostess stand, scrolling through her phone. The chalkboard out front had last week's specials still listed, smudged by weather and neglect. It was subtle decay, not disaster, but I recognized it instantly. A business that had stopped breathing. I kept walking, not lingering, not gloating, just confirming what I already knew. Back home, I added a new section to my growing Ember archive: operational instability. I noted dates, took photographs discreetly from across the street, and captured social media analytics showing engagement drop-off. Camila had warned me that cases built on emotional betrayal rarely held weight, but patterns, hard, trackable patterns, told stories the court would believe. This wasn't about lawsuits yet, but it might be. Jack didn't know it, but he was building my case every time he failed to replace what I once managed. The real shift came 2 weeks later when Jack called me, not from the restaurant, but from his personal number, something he hadn't used since our fallout. I let it go to voicemail, then played it twice before deciding what to do. His tone was different, not apologetic, not arrogant, just tired. "Hey, Lena, I don't want to fight. Can we talk?" That was all he said, and for the first time since he cut me out, I believed he wasn't posturing. I agreed to meet him at the park again, our unofficial neutral zone. He was already sitting on the same bench, hoodie up, coffee in hand. I sat beside him without speaking, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to fill it. "I know things haven't gone the way either of us expected," he said, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "And I know what I did to you was wrong." I didn't rush in to comfort him. He needed to say it fully, without rescue. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought if I didn't own all of it, it wouldn't feel like mine. But now I'm drowning in it, and I keep thinking about everything we built, how it worked when we worked together." His voice cracked slightly on that last sentence, and I turned toward him, watching his hands grip the paper coffee cup like a lifeline. "What do you want, Jack?" I asked, keeping my tone firm but not cruel. He looked at me then, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "I want you to come back," he said, "not just as a consultant, as a real partner, publicly, officially, 50-50. The silence that followed was heavier than the wind shifting the branches above us. I didn't answer right away. I studied him, searching for sincerity beyond the fatigue. I saw in his posture, in the way his shoulders curled inward, not out of defeat, but humility. He wasn't playing a game this time, but forgiveness was not an automatic reward for collapse. "I still have the check you gave me," I said. "I never cashed it. It's sitting in a drawer with the other one." He nodded like he already knew. "I've got documentation, Jack. Proof of everything. If I wanted to sue, I could. But that's not what I want either." He looked relieved, but I didn't let him speak yet. "If I come back," I continued, "we're doing this right. Signed agreements, equal ownership, divided responsibilities, and public acknowledgement of my contributions from day one. No secrets, no edits to the past." He didn't argue. He just said, "Okay," and for the first time in months, I believed he meant it. I stood slowly, brushing leaves off my coat. "You'll have something from my lawyer by Friday." Back at home, I called Camilla and gave her the update. She didn't sound surprised. "He burned the ship and realized he needed the other half of the crew," she said. "Let's make sure you build a new one with lifeboats this time." We laughed, but her point stuck. Jack had come to me out of desperation, not enlightenment, and that mattered. The documents we drafted were airtight. 50-50 ownership retroactively applied to day one, with specific clauses preventing future power grabs. Profit sharing, asset division, dispute arbitration, all spelled out in unambiguous legal terms. Jack received a copy on Thursday morning, and by evening he'd signed. I signed the following day, in the presence of my attorney and a notary. We held our first official partner meeting that Sunday evening in the office above the restaurant kitchen. The space had changed. My framed copy of the business license was gone, and a few of Jack's solo press clippings had taken its place, but it still smelled the same: lavender cleaner and grilled rosemary chicken. He pulled out a notebook, I opened my laptop, and we started. No apologies, no nostalgia, just two people finally doing what they promised. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was progress. I reviewed finances, noting which vendors had shifted terms and outlined a plan to stabilize operations. Jack shared kitchen feedback and staff morale notes, admitting where things had frayed. We discussed hiring a dedicated GM, someone neutral, to keep things balanced. And when we finished, we shook hands like business people instead of siblings. That night, I walked out of the restaurant not feeling triumphant, but steady. My name was back on the books, my title reinstated, and the truth, my truth, made official. Jack could have had that from the beginning. Instead, he'd taken the long, punishing road to clarity. I wasn't sure yet if we could rebuild trust, but the business? That, at least, was back on equal ground. Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know if you have any questions so far and why you haven't subscribed yet. The first few weeks of our renewed partnership felt like walking across thin ice, functional but tense, polite but distant. Jack kept his focus on the kitchen and rarely made eye contact during our scheduled check-ins, while I stayed rooted in finance and operations, avoiding anything personal. We weren't fighting anymore, but we weren't siblings again either. The space between us, once filled with laughter and shared plans, now held the silent history of betrayal. I wondered if that distance would shrink over time, or if we'd just learn to work around it indefinitely. The staff sensed the shift too, though no one addressed it directly. Rachel, the sous chef I'd hired months ago, welcomed me back with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Glad to see you again," she said softly, then turned back to her prep work. Some of the servers asked subtle questions. "Are you full-time now? Are you back for good?" And I answered truthfully without explaining the past. They didn't need the whole story to know something had gone wrong and that it was being slowly, delicately fixed. Jack made an effort during our weekly meetings to include me in discussions that used to be his domain exclusively. He asked my opinion on the new fall tasting menu, invited me to sit in on supplier tastings, and even agreed to let me renegotiate terms with our produce vendor who had shortened credit windows during his solo reign. I noticed he hesitated before decisions now, pausing as if expecting resistance or judgment. I offered none, not out of forgiveness, but because I needed us to function. I wanted success more than vindication, at least on the outside. Behind closed doors, I was still cataloging everything. Every document, every message, every revision to our shared agreements lived in cloud folders only I controlled. I wasn't preparing for another war. I was building insurance. If Jack faltered again, if he tried to rewrite history a second time, I would not be caught off guard. My trust had limits now, and I didn't pretend otherwise, not even to myself. Then came the review, not from a blogger or influencer, but from The Fork Line, a respected national food magazine known for visiting hidden gems and catapulting them to fame. They showed up anonymously on a rainy Thursday, ordering almost every dish on the menu without fanfare. Rachel spotted the writer's credit card when he paid and gave Jack a heads up. Jack barely slept that night, pacing the kitchen long after close while I double-checked every receipt, table note, and staff log. We both knew this review could change everything. When the article dropped a week later, it exploded across social media. The reviewer called Ember a masterclass in rustic innovation, praising the balance of flavors and the refined simplicity of its atmosphere. But the part that made me pause was this. Founded by sibling duo Jack and Lena Fields, Ember draws on their complementary strengths to deliver something both intimate and ambitious. It was the first time since our fallout that someone in the media had acknowledged me alongside him. Jack hadn't corrected it. That mattered. Calls started coming in immediately. Requests for private dinners, feature interviews, even a book agent inquiring about a possible Ember cookbook. Jack forwarded everything to our shared inbox now, not his personal account. We spent hours sorting through the noise, deciding what opportunities to pursue and which ones could wait. For the first time in months, our conversation stretched beyond logistics. We were building again, not out of obligation, but because the spark had returned. It didn't mean everything was healed. At a family dinner 2 Sundays later, our mother still looked uncertain when she asked how the restaurant was going. Jack answered smoothly, "It's strong. Lena and I are making a great team again." I smiled politely, but I could feel the caution in her gaze, like she still expected us to implode. Aunt Elise, however, raised her wine glass. "Told you both you were better together than apart," she said with a knowing look. After dessert, our father pulled me aside as everyone else drifted into conversation. "I read that article," he said, voice low. "You handled this with a kind of grace I didn't expect. I'm proud of you, Lena." The words caught me off guard. I wasn't sure if I should feel seen or simply sad that he'd ever expected less. Jack and I eventually agreed on a plan to expand our operations. Not a second restaurant yet, but a catering branch for private events and corporate tastings. It was my idea, born from the increased demand we were seeing, and Jack didn't just agree, he deferred. "You take the lead," he said. "This is your lane." It was the first time he'd acknowledged my strength without any trace of defensiveness. We launched Ember & Company with minimal fanfare, using our existing kitchen and a separate online presence. I handled the branding, staff training, pricing models, and logistics. Jack curated custom menus for clients and trained a small mobile kitchen team. It worked better than either of us expected. Fewer overheads, higher margins, and a new revenue stream that quickly stabilized our books. Within 3 months, the catering arm was responsible for 30% of our total profit. The more we succeeded, the more the past pressed against us. Not as open wounds, but as old scars we both pretended didn't itch. One night after a long event, we sat in the back of the delivery van, eating leftover beet tartlets and drinking canned soda. "I should have never done what I did," Jack said suddenly, his voice flat but sincere. I looked at him but said nothing. He shook his head, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't know how to share what I loved without being afraid someone would take it away." "Sharing isn't giving it away," I said after a moment. "It's multiplying it." He nodded slowly, then took another bite of tartlet, and the silence between us felt less heavy than usual. Maybe that was all the apology I was going to get. Maybe that was all I needed. Not the words, but the recognition. Finally. In the weeks that followed our quiet conversation in the van, something subtle began to shift in how Jack and I worked together. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a kind of ease returned to our partnership, the comfortable rhythm we'd once shared in those early build-out days. We no longer danced around each other during staff meetings or tried to outmaneuver one another in decisions. When problems came up, we addressed them as a team, splitting tasks without needing a long negotiation. The weight of our history was still there, but it had settled into something manageable, like a scar that no longer ached. Rachel noticed first, pulling me aside after a particularly smooth Friday dinner rush. "You two finally found your groove again," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's good for the team." The tension was getting weird. I nodded, appreciating her candor. "We're working on it," I said. And that was the truth. The catering arm continued to grow faster than we anticipated, leading to our first major logistical bottleneck, storage space. I suggested we lease a small off-site kitchen, something streamlined for prep and transport, and Jack didn't hesitate. "Do it," he said. "Tell me what you need." It felt good to be trusted again, not just as a partner on paper, but as someone whose judgment carried real weight. The property we found was a compact, well-ventilated kitchen with an attached storage bay and a narrow front office. It was nothing glamorous, but it was efficient and clean, and I could already envision the workflows as I toured it. I signed the lease the following week under our shared LLC, and Jack joined me on a Saturday morning to begin outfitting the space. We built shelves together like we used to build Lego towers as kids. Quietly, competitively, but always in sync. It wasn't sentimental, it was efficient, even fun. That afternoon, while assembling a rolling rack, Jack asked me if I still had the napkin sketches he'd made that first night we talked about Ember. "I think they're in the kitchen junk drawer," I said, surprised. "Why?" he shrugged. "Just thinking about how far we've come, it's wild how ideas turn into real things." Later that night, I actually looked for the sketches. They were there, folded and smudged, stuffed between a takeout menu and an expired coupon. I smoothed them out on my table, tracing the lines of his messy handwriting, open layout, seasonal produce board, fire-themed name, and felt a strange ache rise in my throat. This was the version of Jack I missed the most. Not the restaurant owner or chef, but the dreamer who needed someone to believe in him. And despite everything, I had. 2 weeks later, we were invited to participate in a local chef showcase, the kind of event that brought press, foodies, and future investors together in one massive tasting hall. Jack immediately saw it as a PR opportunity, while I saw logistics, transport permits, booth setup, product inventory, and staff scheduling. We divided the tasks accordingly, our roles clear and complementary. The day of the event, we arrived early, set up fast, and presented with calm precision. As guests filtered through and tasted our dishes, crispy pork belly on fig jam crostini, jackfruit tostadas with pickled radish, I watched Jack interact with charm and humility. No grandstanding, no inflated stories, just genuine pride and careful credit where it was due. "My sister built the entire catering arm," he told a journalist from the Times-Herald. "She's the reason we're here today." I didn't expect it, and I didn't need it, but hearing it out loud still mattered. That evening, after we packed up the last of our equipment, we sat side by side in the van again, drained but satisfied. "We make a good team," Jack said, staring at the dark windshield. I nodded, sipping from a lukewarm water bottle. "We always did. You just forgot for a while." He didn't argue. He just said, "Yeah." Back at the restaurant, we returned to a full inbox and a voicemail from a talent scout at a streaming service interested in a documentary series about sibling-led restaurants. "It's early," she said, "but your story has the right emotional hook." Jack played the message twice, then looked at me. "We'd control our narrative, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "That depends on how honest we're willing to be." The idea hung between us like smoke, tempting, uncertain, potentially dangerous. A public platform meant exposure, and exposure meant questions about the gap in our timeline, the change in leadership, the almost broken business that now looked thriving. Jack hesitated, tapping his pen against the edge of the counter. "Maybe we hold off," he said, "or maybe we tell it our way before someone else does." I didn't say yes or no. I just opened a fresh document on my laptop, titled Ember, The Real Story. The next day, we started mapping out a brand refresh. New photos, updated messaging, a revised about page that included both our bios and contributions. We hired a copywriter to shape the tone, someone neutral who could thread honesty with grace. I reviewed every draft carefully, flagging anything that glossed over key facts or leaned too heavily into Jack's lone genius myth. "It's our story now," I told the copywriter. Not his, not mine, ours. Our revised site launched 2 weeks later with little fanfare but clear impact. Regular customers commented on the change, and a few newer ones emailed to say how refreshing it was to see sibling partnerships celebrated in business. One comment stood out. "You can feel the balance, like every dish was made by two minds, not one." That line stayed with me, a quiet validation of everything we had built, broken, and rebuilt. At our next monthly partner meeting, we reviewed the usual revenue trends, catering leads, staffing updates. When the numbers showed a 20% growth since the relaunch, I looked at Jack and said, "Feels like we're finally doing this right." He nodded. "Took a hell of a route to get here." I closed my notebook. "Still counts." We never talked about trust again. Not directly, but it showed up in how we moved through the business. Jack no longer hesitated before forwarding vendor contracts or sharing sensitive numbers, and I no longer double-checked every sentence of his emails before co-signing. Our rhythm returned, quieter than before, but more efficient, less fragile. We weren't trying to impress each other anymore. We were trying to maintain momentum, and in that space, something resembling respect took root again. The restaurant began drawing more corporate clients, many of them curious about the catering arm after seeing photos from the showcase event. Jack was approached by a local university to guest lecture on farm-to-table practices, and he asked me to join as a co-presenter. "You built the back end," he told me. "They need to hear how that works too." I agreed, not for the exposure, but because it felt like the kind of acknowledgement we'd both once taken for granted. The lecture went better than either of us expected. Students asked questions about startup funding, brand development, and menu scalability. Jack took the culinary ones, I handled the logistics, and for once, we sounded like founders, not a chef and his financier, but actual partners. Afterward, one of the program directors approached us about mentoring students in the school's entrepreneurship incubator. Jack looked at me before answering, and I gave a slight nod. "We'd love to," he said. That afternoon, while reviewing the upcoming schedule in the van, Jack turned toward me. "You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't cut you out?" I didn't respond right away, letting the question sit between us. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I think about what might have happened if you hadn't asked me back even more." He looked out the window, his profile tense, and said, "That was the best decision I've made in the last 2 years." With Ember & Company thriving, and the restaurant finally running smoothly under shared leadership, I began exploring new opportunities. I wasn't planning to leave, but I needed to stretch, consulting with other startups, mentoring women in small business accelerators, speaking at events that had once felt out of reach. Jack supported it without protest. "Do it," he said. "You're not just Ember's COO, you're Lena Fields." One of my side projects led to a collaboration with a nonprofit food initiative aimed at expanding healthy dining options in low-income communities. I pitched a joint pop-up series, and Jack jumped in immediately, offering recipes and kitchen staff for the trial runs. The first event was hosted in a community center gymnasium, tables lined with budget-friendly gourmet samples and informational booths. We served over 300 people that day, and the response was overwhelming. "No one's ever made food like this feel accessible," one attendee said, and Jack smiled the way he used to, unburdened. That night, we cleaned up quietly, the way we had on opening night at Ember, side by side, our sleeves rolled up, hands moving in sync. "You feel like we finally arrived?" I asked. Jack looked around the empty gym, still buzzing with leftover energy. "No," he said, "but I feel like we're finally going in the right direction." It was the most hopeful thing he'd said in months, but hope wasn't the same as peace, and some wounds were slower to heal than others. Our parents, while supportive, still walked a careful line, rarely bringing up the past, but never quite stepping into the present either. At family dinners, our mother would ask about the restaurant, avoiding names or credit. Our father stuck to neutral comments, "Seems like business is good," and steered conversation toward non-threatening topics. Aunt Elise remained the only one who treated our reunion like a victory. One evening, after a quiet meal at Ember, Elise stayed behind while the others left. She pulled me aside near the bar, the place where Jack once told me I was out. "You ever going to tell them the whole story?" she asked. I hesitated. "I don't know that it would help," I said honestly. "Maybe not," she agreed, "but it might help you." I carried that thought with me for days, weighing the pros and cons. What would it solve? Would it undo the betrayal, or would it just reopen it? In the end, I decided not to force it. Jack had made his amends the way he knew how, through partnership, consistency, and transparency. And I wasn't going to strip that down to a courtroom retelling, just to make a point. Instead, I focused on the future. We began discussing the possibility of a second location, not a replica of Ember, but something that evolved from it. Jack suggested a wine bar concept with tapas-style offerings, lighter staff needs, and a more intimate footprint. I handled the feasibility study, mapping out costs, location data, and brand positioning. We agreed not to rush it. Success had taught us the value of pacing. As we toured potential spaces, I watched Jack move through each one with thoughtful quiet. No longer the impulsive dreamer who once pitched restaurant ideas on paper napkins. He measured walls, sketched layouts, and waited for my input before making decisions. I realized then how much he had changed, not just in how he treated me, but in how he approached his own ambition. He was no longer trying to prove something. He was trying to build something that could last. After one long day of location scouting, we stopped at a small cafe to decompress. Jack stirred his coffee in silence for a while before speaking. "You know, I never said the words." I looked at him, puzzled. "Which words?" He met my eyes and said, "I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you. For what I took away. I didn't speak for a moment, absorbing the weight of that delayed apology. "Thank you," I said quietly. I needed to hear it, even if I didn't need it to move forward. He nodded, and the air between us shifted again. Lighter, but rooted. We had been through the fire and walked out changed. Not unscarred, but still standing, together. Jack's apology settled into my bones like the last puzzle piece of a long unsolved picture. It didn't change the past, but it grounded our present in something real, accountability, not avoidance. I didn't bring it up again, and neither did he, but its presence was felt in every meeting, every decision, every quiet moment where trust had once been broken and now held steady. Our staff picked up on it too. Smiles came more easily. The kitchen ran more smoothly, and tension no longer lingered like smoke after a fire. We were no longer rebuilding, we were thriving. The wine bar project took shape faster than expected, partially because this time we knew what we were doing. We signed a lease on a cozy corner property with exposed brick walls and perfect evening light, and named it Kindred, a nod to what had almost been lost. Jack took creative lead on the menu, small plates inspired by our childhood favorites, elevated but honest. I handled branding, launch events, supplier contracts, and recruited a lean, experienced team. It felt less like starting from scratch, and more like expanding a legacy we'd finally earned the right to call shared. During construction, I found myself walking the floor alone in the evenings, watching the build take shape. The bar installation reminded me of the mahogany one at Ember, where Jack had once told me we needed to keep things simple the same night he fired me. I ran my fingers along the new walnut edge, sturdy and smooth, and let the old memory sit without resentment. This wasn't a replacement. It was an evolution. A space built not on apology, but mutual intention. Opening night at Kindred was quieter than Ember's had been, but it felt more meaningful. We didn't invite press, just family, friends, and a few loyal customers from our original spot. Jack cooked from behind the bar while I worked the floor, introducing people, answering questions, and quietly absorbing every smile that passed between sips of sangria and bites of crispy artichoke hearts. Aunt Elise was the first to give a toast, short, proud, and pointed. "To second chances," she said, raising her glass, "and to siblings who don't let one chapter define the whole book." After the crowd thinned, Jack and I sat outside on the curb, plates of leftovers balanced on our knees. "You remember when we tried to make grilled cheese sandwiches in Mom's iron skillet and burned them so bad the fire alarm went off?" he asked with a laugh. I nodded. "You told me it was my fault for using cheddar slices instead of shredded cheese." He grinned, leaning back against the wall. "And you still helped me clean it up before she got home." "That's kind of been the theme, hasn't it?" I said, only half joking. "You set something on fire, I cleaned it up." He gave a tired smile. This time, I really did try to fix it too. I looked over at him, the brother I had once almost written off entirely, and saw someone trying every day to be better. Not perfect, just better. Kindred's soft launch turned into a buzzworthy hit. Within a month, we had 3 write-ups in regional food blogs and were booked out on weekends. The wine list Jack curated brought in a new clientele, older, more refined, eager for something quieter than Ember's energy. I created a loyalty program that rewarded both locations and saw a 40% uptick in cross-location traffic. Our growth was no longer just about surviving, it was about legacy. During one of our partnership meetings, Jack brought up something unexpected. "I've been thinking," he said, flipping through his notes. "What if we formalize the parent company, turn Ember and Kindred into brands under a single hospitality group?" I paused, surprised not by the idea but by the fact that he had brought it to me first, before acting. "We'd need to restructure everything," I said. "Tax, legal, staff systems." He nodded. "Yeah, but we'd do it right. Together." We filed the paperwork 2 weeks later. Fields & Fields Hospitality Group, LLC. The name felt strange at first. Both of our names side by side, in something neither of us could take away. Jack updated his LinkedIn bio to reflect the new title, and I did the same. "No more erasing history," he said. "We're building this one page at a time." It was the first time I didn't feel the urge to double-check whether I was credited fairly. As the company grew, we started speaking at events together, Jack handling the culinary innovation side, me addressing operations and equity in family-led businesses. Our story became part of the brand, though we never shared every detail. We focused on lessons, the cost of broken trust, the importance of documentation, the power of reconciliation when it's earned and not assumed. Audiences responded with curiosity, empathy, and often a kind of shocked recognition. We weren't selling drama. We were offering proof that repair was possible. Then one evening, while cleaning up after a networking dinner we had hosted at Kindred, Jack handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, already suspicious. "Just open it." Inside was the original check he had written me after firing me. $212,000, still crisp in its envelope, never deposited. "I found it when I was cleaning my old desk," he said. "I wanted to throw it out, but I thought maybe you should be the one to do it." I stared at the check, the physical reminder of the ugliest thing he'd ever done to me. "I kept it," I said slowly, "not because I needed the money, but because it reminded me what not to ignore next time." He nodded. "So, maybe now you don't need the reminder anymore." I folded the check back into the envelope and dropped it in the kitchen trash without ceremony. "No," I said. "I think we're past that chapter." Jack didn't say anything, but he smiled. Not a showman's grin, but the quiet expression of someone who understood exactly what that meant. We didn't hug. We just got back to work. By summer, Fields & Fields Hospitality Group had outgrown our expectations. Ember remained steady, Kindred was thriving, and our consulting inbox was now full of inquiries from early-stage restaurateurs looking for mentorship or partnership. We set up monthly office hours for local startups and began interviewing interns from the university program we'd lectured in. The students were sharp, full of ideas we hadn't considered, and they reminded me of who Jack and I had been before everything fell apart. It was strange to feel proud of the same brother I'd once prepared to sue. Our parents finally visited Kindred 3 months after it opened, walking in one quiet Sunday afternoon between the lunch and dinner crowds. I spotted them before Jack did, and I met them at the door with 2 glasses of chilled white wine and a small plate of fried sage leaves, my favorite. Mom looked around, visibly impressed by the warm lighting and delicate attention to detail, while Dad nodded slowly, a smile twitching behind his mustache. "This one feels grown up," he said. "I like it." Jack came from the back with his apron still on, and instead of awkwardness, there was something that almost resembled peace. We didn't talk about the past. No one brought up Ember's early days, or the check, or the things we'd said and done when our trust was broken. But when Jack introduced me as the real backbone of everything we've built, and my mother squeezed my hand under the table, I knew they understood more than they were saying. Sometimes silence is an apology too, and other times it's the space that lets healing breathe. That evening, as they left, Dad said, "You two turned something really painful into something solid. We're proud of both of you." And for once, I believed him. Outside of family, the wider industry had begun to take note of our story. Not because we sold it, but because it came up naturally in everything we did. Our dual leadership model became a case study in resilience during a food innovation conference. A journalist from a national publication reached out about profiling us for their Founder Fracture series, focused on business partners who had once nearly walked away from everything. Jack was hesitant, but I told him it was our chance to reclaim the narrative fully and truthfully. "We don't have to air every detail," I said. "But if people are going to talk about our past, I'd rather they hear it from us." The interview took place in the back office at Ember, where he had once fired me with a manila envelope and practiced attachment. We sat side by side on opposite ends of the same couch we used for staff debriefs, and the journalist asked everything we'd expected. What went wrong, how we rebuilt, and whether we'd ever trust each other completely again. "We don't have to," I said. "We just have to trust the system we've built around us," Jack added. "We don't always agree, but now we have the tools to disagree without burning the place down." When the article published, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from other business partners, siblings, even married couples working together, all saying the same thing: "Thank you for telling the truth." We were invited to speak at more conferences, not just about food, but about conflict resolution, succession planning, and what happened when emotional betrayal intersected with financial stakes. We accepted only a few, careful to prioritize our operations. Jack still preferred the kitchen to the stage, but he learned how to use his voice without turning it into a spotlight. One afternoon, while finalizing staff schedules, Jack asked me a question I hadn't anticipated. "Do you ever regret giving me the money?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be honest. "I regret how it happened," I said. "But I don't regret betting on you. I just wish you hadn't made me fight to prove I wasn't a bystander." He nodded, rubbing his hands together like he always did when thinking something through. "I wasn't ready back then. I thought control meant safety, and I saw your investment as a debt instead of a vote of confidence." I looked up from my laptop. "You were scared." I was too. The difference is, I didn't turn fear into betrayal. We didn't linger in the tension. There was work to do, menus to finalize, wine deliveries to schedule, but the air had cleared a little more after that. We had stopped pretending we were perfect partners, and instead focused on being functional, respectful ones. That shift made all the difference. Our meetings became more productive, our staff retention improved, and even the long hours didn't grind us down the way they used to. Stability, it turned out, didn't have to be boring. It could be quietly revolutionary. As the holiday season approached, Ember booked out completely, and Kindred launched a seasonal wine pairing series that sold out before we could print the promotional postcards. We hosted a joint staff party in the courtyard between the two locations, strung with fairy lights and filled with laughter. Jack grilled lamb skewers while I refilled glasses and passed around bonus envelopes, each labeled with handwritten notes of appreciation. "This year only worked because all of you made it happen," I told them, standing on a makeshift platform made from stacked wine crates. "Thank you for building this with us." That night, after most of the team had gone home and the lights dimmed, Jack handed me a gift-wrapped box. "Open it tomorrow," he said. "Trust me." I did as he asked, waiting until morning before carefully unwrapping the thin navy paper and finding a wooden frame inside. It held the original Ember napkin sketches, pressed between museum glass, and beneath them was a gold-embossed plaque. "For Lena," who saw the blueprint when it was only paper and made it real. I stared at it for a long time, fingers brushing over the edge of the frame, the words settling into me like something I hadn't realized I still needed. Not money, not acknowledgement in press interviews or contracts or websites, just this: quiet, thoughtful recognition of what had been nearly erased and finally restored. I placed it above my desk, across from our signed partnership agreement, and let it remind me what we'd built, through fire, fracture, and finally forgiveness. The framed napkin sketch became the quiet centerpiece of my office, a reminder not just of where we started, but how close we came to losing everything. I found myself glancing at it during phone calls and strategy meetings, sometimes smiling, sometimes just breathing a little deeper. There was a gravity in that glass, in those ink-smeared lines that once represented a dream, then a betrayal, and now a legacy. Jack had finally given me something I hadn't asked for, but had always deserved. Not credit, but care. It felt like closure, but not the kind that ends something, more like the kind that lets something begin again. Kindred expanded its hours due to demand, while Ember underwent a subtle menu refresh to celebrate its second anniversary. Jack created a series of seasonal dishes inspired by our mother's old recipe cards, and I worked with our design intern to relaunch the website with new imagery and updated brand language. Everything felt aligned: creative energy, financial stability, mutual respect. It was the first time I felt completely confident that the business wouldn't crumble if I took a step back. So I did something unexpected. I booked a flight to Spain. It wasn't permanent, just a 6-week sabbatical I had promised myself 2 years earlier and had never dared to schedule. Jack blinked when I told him, but didn't protest. "You deserve it," he said, "and we've got this." We created a handoff plan with our GM, held 2 transition meetings with staff, and co-wrote an update for our vendors. On the morning of my departure, Jack handed me a brown envelope with a handwritten note inside. "Have an adventure, we'll be fine." Barcelona greeted me with citrus air and late sunsets, and for the first time in years, I didn't think about invoices or wine orders or whether a prep cook had shown up on time. I wandered street markets, took cooking classes, and journaled more than I had since college. Somewhere between a solo dinner in Gracia and a walk through El Born, I realized how much space I'd given to proving myself, to Jack, to my parents, to the version of me that once needed to be right just to feel safe. That part of me was still there, but it didn't run the show anymore. I could breathe, finally, without bracing for impact. Jack and I exchanged occasional texts, brief, warm, and entirely professional. He sent photos from Ember's anniversary party, a snapshot of Rachel holding up a carrot cake I'd once suggested during our food truck brainstorms. I sent back a picture of a seafood paella with the caption, "Stealing this concept." He replied, "Only if you bring back sherry." Our conversations were sparse but light, the kind of ease I hadn't expected to return between us. When I came back, the restaurant didn't feel like it had missed a beat. The systems we'd built had held, the staff had risen to the occasion, and Jack had kept things moving without micromanaging. It was proof of maturity, not just his, but mine too. We had created a structure that didn't rely on resentment or fear, and because of that, it stood on its own. I walked through both locations that day, hugging staff, asking questions, smiling so much my cheeks hurt. Later that evening, Jack and I sat in the Ember office again, the same place where everything had broken, and, somehow, where everything had been rebuilt. He poured us each a glass of wine from a Spanish vineyard I'd visited, and we clinked glasses quietly. "You look different," he said, lighter. I nodded, grateful. I feel like myself again, just without the weight. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head, looking at the framed critic's review on the wall. "We really did it, huh?" I looked at him. The brother who had once erased me with a manila folder and a check, now sitting across from me in quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd survived. "We're still doing it," I said. "That's the part that matters." He smiled. "You're right. I still don't know how I got it so wrong before." "You were scared," I said, echoing the same truth I had come to accept over time. "And you wanted something to be yours, without realizing it already was." He didn't argue. Instead, he raised his glass again. "To not needing to steal something to know you belong to it." I tapped my glass against his. "To knowing better, finally." In the following months, we focused less on expansion and more on refinement. We promoted Rachel to culinary director, hired a second GM, and launched a rotating mentorship program with a local high school's culinary arts class. Jack handled the student chefs like a coach, demanding but kind, while I worked with their parents to explain the importance of soft skills and fiscal discipline. We weren't just building businesses anymore, we were building something generational. Then, one day, while reviewing quarterly reports in the courtyard between Ember and Kindred, Jack looked up from his screen. "You know we could sell, right?" I paused, caught off guard. "You want to?" He shook his head. "No. But we could. That's the difference." I understood what he meant. Our success was no longer theoretical or fragile. It was measurable, valuable, something people would pay a lot to own. But the thought of letting go felt premature, like closing a book only halfway through. "Maybe one day," I said, "but for now, I like writing the next chapter ourselves." That night, I sat in my home office and pulled out an old folder labeled Restaurant Build Lena. I hadn't opened it in over a year, but it felt right. Inside were blueprints, contracts, and copies of those early vendor agreements Jack once claimed didn't mean anything. I moved them to a new folder titled Foundation. Not because I needed evidence anymore, but because I wanted to remember what had actually built this. Not trust, not betrayal, but the choice to keep going anyway. At our next staff meeting, I shared the story of Ember's first night and the single Yelp review that nearly derailed Jack's confidence. He laughed when I reminded him he'd considered changing the entire menu over one sentence. "You kept me grounded," he said in front of the entire team. "And then you helped me fly." The room erupted into applause, and I didn't look away this time. I let it land. We ended that year with both businesses profitable, our team strong, and our sibling bonds scarred but honest. There were still moments of friction, but now they passed like summer storms, loud but brief, never destructive. We had built something real, not just out of food and furniture, but out of consequence, resilience, and stubborn grace. And in the quiet moments, when customers lingered over their last sip or a server laughed behind the bar, I remembered what Jack had once said: equal partners in something real. Thank you for listening to Lena's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.